Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Timelines podcast brought to you by the Watch Preserve. If you've spent any time around us here at the shop, you'll know that something that I and Nick get excited about is the history and real life usage of vintage watches and hearing stories about how they were actually used and by who. And my guest today also shares that interest. He's a paramedic who's turned into something of a phenomenon in the watch space, running one of the largest Instagram accounts dedicated to real-life historical usage of wristwatches. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Justin Couture, also known as the Wristorian. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on. I have been following your Instagram account since the pandemic, and I always find it fascinating and interesting. In fact, I was before I came to work today, I was talking to my brother about who I was going to be talking to today, and he's like, "Didn't you send me like 5 or 6 of his posts back in 2020?" Because I thought it was like some of the coolest stuff. My brother's not a watch guy, and he didn't get it, but I've been following your account for a long time, so I'm super excited to have you on and kind of learn more about you and how you came to create this Instagram account.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it did kind of start. I'm glad to hear it. Ideally, the stuff that I post will be enjoyed by watch people and non-watch people. Uh, because I try to tell more than just a story about watches if I can. That was kind of the whole impetus for the site. It was during COVID. It was, uh, I like to write, so it was an easy transition to just say, well, why don't I do something? And I like history, I like watches, I like writing, and so it just seemed like kind of a natural blend of the three. At the time, there weren't a lot of Instagram accounts doing that so much. This was, years ago. There are now, so I appreciate your intro. I don't know if I'm the largest and most prolific page dedicated to this anymore, but because there's some really good accounts out there that Watches of Espionage, Ben Lowry, Submersible Risk. They were doing some really good stuff with kind of similar veins, history and watches, and I'm glad that there's room for all of us kind of in this area. But yeah, so I started a few years ago and just kind of, like I said, wanted to highlight specific models and specific instances in time where they were used, and it's not tied to any marketing of any brand. It's literally just like it's objective, which I enjoy. It's just this watch was here. If you think that's cool, like I do, that's great. And if you don't care, which some people don't, that's great too. But then the Moon watch doesn't get all the recognition or the Rolex subs or whatever. You say there was a Seiko, there was a Bulova, there was a Nevada Grenchen, this and that. So it's just nice to kind of highlight because really, if you look at it historically, I mean, there's so many different brands and models that have been involved in so many cool programs, military programs, government programs, just individual pursuits, all sorts of things. So, so I like to highlight it, and it's been years, so I'm glad people are still enjoying it for now.
Yeah, we do kind of live. We're really kind of spoiled for choice now with watch content because, like you, there are so many excellent purveyors, I guess you could say, of historical
Mm-hmm.
information that for those of us, I started collecting in 2015, sorry, and back then the watch internet was really just kind of taking off, especially on Instagram. We had the forums and stuff, but Instagram was growing very rapidly, and so now with people like you or like Ben or like Woe, like we're very spoiled to have such good content out there. And I guess now, since we're already just talking about it, I guess you've probably been asked this question many, many times, but what's the process like for finding these images? I know probably some of it you've got your special tips and tricks, but I wonder if you could just speak to how you go about them, because for anybody who's been on your Instagram, I mean, there's hundreds of images and sometimes very niche watches, very niche sort of historical moments. So do you literally just stay up till 3 in the morning scrolling old photo archives, or do you have any other tips that you do for that?
No, yeah, I mean, it's probably closer to the former than the latter. I wish I could say there was like an amazing magic process, but a lot of it is literally just like, yeah, just like scrolling through thumbnails. I mean, knowing what archives you can look at. And I wish it was like a proprietary Wristorian process, but it's really not. It involves a lot of digging. I mean, I started from scratch like everyone else. It's not like I had a history. I don't have a history degree. I wasn't familiar with the databases. For me, it really kind of started with a Seiko that I'm wearing now, but a Seiko 6306. That has some interesting text on the dial that ended up being from an Antarctic research program. And so this is the only one that's actually known that has this exact printing on the dial. There were 2 years the program ran, and so you get some that say 1979 to 80 and some that say 78 to 79. So mine says 79 to 80. I've seen maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 examples that have the other date range. So it all started with that, and that forced me to find archives that had photos from Antarctica, which led me to a New Zealand page, New Zealand Antarctic Research Program archives, which are pretty extensive. So that allowed me to do a lot of research. So, that was kind of the first one I used, and that gave me kind of like a good launching pad for just using archives. I mean, luckily you're not just you're still combing through thousands of photos sometimes, which does take, I won't do it at 3 a.m. because I'm just completely useless after, 8 p.m. Luckily you can at least some archives you can do date ranges, which help, because I can just type in like, I'm not really interested in anything newer than 1990 if I want to focus on this. But or in that case, my watch on the dial says 1979 to 80. So you go, well, it probably didn't exist before 78. I can go up to 85 because presumably people would still maybe wear these watches for years after the program. So you can do it. Some of them you're lucky you can do that and it works. Some of them have that functionality and it just doesn't. It's like it doesn't seem to actually work. You'll still get them from 2008, even though you filtered 1960 to 1980. So, and then you can do keywords and stuff. So a lot of it is diving, scuba, helicopter, pilot. You try to find things that are going to be interesting, and then you just go from there. So, I mean, it's just been lucky stumbling upon this, and a lot of this specific watch. The archives, I mean, they were helpful because I found photos of the program, but nothing was good enough for me to say this person in this photo is wearing this exact watch. You may say they're wearing a Seiko Turtle, presumably a 6306, although it could go either way, right? And you can't make out the dial text, so you just kind of go, it's possible, but then you can still say a watch that was some form of turtle, whether it's 6306 or 6309, was being worn by a scientist in the program in 1979. A lot of this watch was actually reaching out to people who were in the program, which is, again, just more sort of internet sleuthing. This particular one, a whole scientific report was written because it was a government project. And that report listed everybody who was involved in the project. From there, it's just literally, like anybody would do, Googling their names. A lot of them were academic. So professors, these people are geochemists, geologists. So a lot of them still teach in Australia, New Zealand, or are retired but still have an email address tied to a school. So I was able to reach out to probably, 4 or 5 different people involved in the program. And I mean, that's best case scenario when you're doing something like this because you're getting direct information from people who were there.
Right.
You get lucky sometimes. That doesn't work out too often, especially because we operate in the realm predominantly of vintage watches. And obviously the people involved in these programs are now like in their 80s. Eventually we won't be able to talk to those people at all, so I was sort of lucky, but that's what got me started. And then, it's literally just kind of digging through. Sometimes you just go, I wonder if like Harvard University has any interesting archives. A lot of universities have really good photo archives. So, then I find a random 6105 on some scientist in a lab at Harvard or, you just kind of, so sometimes it is literally just like combing through them until you see a watch. And then of course you kind of open 20 tabs and then you zoom in and then you try to figure out. Yep.
Yeah, that's I didn't know that the Antarctic Seiko was kind of the one that really propelled you onto this journey. And what a, I mean, what an awesome watch to do that with. If any of the listeners haven't heard or haven't read, sorry, your Hodinkee article, we'll definitely put that up there because that one that you have up on Hodinkee talking specifically about this watch is awesome, and there's so many good pictures in there, and it's amazing that you were able to actually get in touch with some of the people connected to that, which, like you said, is dream scenario. I mean, how many interesting vintage watches have we come across with a weird engraving or weird something? It's like, man, I wish I could just talk to the former owner of this watch and figure out what this guy was doing to kind of know. I'd love to actually kind of go back a little bit in time a little bit because a lot of the watches that you post up on your blog and on your Instagram are sort of military or diving or like government related. And I wonder, did you kind of always have an interest in those sort of watches and that kind of watch history? Or like being a paramedic and maybe wearing watches like in field use, did that also kind of tie into your interest in this world of watches?
No, to the paramedic question. When I was a paramedic, I mean, like I said, I still am a paramedic. I work in pharmaceutical research now, so I'm not on an ambulance anymore. But even when I worked on the ambulance, I wore like a, I don't know, Spider-Man watch I got from, probably childish. I was like 21, and there was some cheap watch I got at like Target, because I just needed something that counted seconds. I never really cared about watches when I was on the ambulance. I can't even really say I've always been interested in history. I mean, I like history, but I remember it just kind of depends. But I have always liked science. I have always liked kind of like adventure, even if it was just hiking and stuff. I mean, I am in military. I was not in the military. I'm not even a diver. I just like the idea of diving. I mean, I like what these people are doing. I like to write and I like to read about it. Someday maybe I will get certified, but I'm not right now. But I was never in the military either. The military thing, I think my grandfather, who passed away years ago, he was in Vietnam. He's a Green Beret and a medic, which was kind of interesting since I was a paramedic, I felt like that was kind of interesting. And but he was 101st Airborne, and I started getting into watches maybe a couple years before he passed away, and I was reading all these articles on Hodinkee from Cole and all these guys about. And you see these threads online too. They're like, oh, here's my grandfather's watch from Vietnam, and it's always like an old beat up Tudor or a Rolex or a 6105 or whatever it is, right? And the Apocalypse Now thing. So I was like, oh, I'm sure my grandfather has a 6105 just laying around. And he didn't. But I did get some photos. I did talk to him about watches before he passed away, when we were. And he said he had a gold Seiko, not a solid gold, like a gold-plated Seiko that he wore. And he went to Vietnam with, I think he said, a Bulova. It lasted, a week. And then, died, and then he bought an automatic Seiko at the PX, and he wore that for the rest of his time in Vietnam, and said it worked great. And so I have some photos of him, and you can kind of see it. Who knows what model it is? Probably some cheap. It wasn't a, well, Seiko wasn't really high end anyway, but it wasn't even like what we would call like, oh, it's a cool model.
Yeah.
But I think some military stuff came from that. And I don't know. I think military does just have good archives too, so it's easier for me to dig through it because military photography is a big part of it, and they're very good at documenting and dating and archiving all of their photos. So, So I think, and a lot of what I focus. I mean, a lot of it's military. A lot of it too, though, is it can be military adjacent, or it can be, like I said, government programs, C Lab. Tektite, but some of it's I think I've posted stuff about. I posted a photo a while back about a lady, a doctor. I don't want to say lady and kind of underscore the fact that she's contributed a ton to orangutan research, which is a very niche thing. But she's still, I think, in Borneo studying orangutans. She's probably like in her 70s.
Oh wow!
But there's photos of her when she was like in her 20s, wearing a Rolex Daytona in the jungles of Borneo working with chimpanzees, and it's just that kind of stuff I really like, even if maybe only 10 other people do. Because it's not your race car driver or your this or that. I mean, it's literally
Yeah.
just who knows how she got it, who knows why she chose that model. It's an unusual place to see a Daytona like that. Um, and it's and it's there. So I like to highlight stuff like that too. All hot air ballooning. I mean, we've done all sorts of things. I think I did one of the first Australian certified helicopter pilot, female helicopter pilot
Uh
who was
huh.
wearing a Breitling Navitimer with like instead of the strap, she had just put a ribbon through it, like what you would tie a ribbon to for a bow in your hair, and it had
Yeah.
like polka dots on it. Yeah, and she was like the first, licensed female helicopter pilot in Australia, and she had a big old Navitimer. So a lot of it's military, a lot of it is just kind of you just get lucky and
Yeah. Is
you
the
just want to point it out.
is the like that Navitimer on the ribbon maybe
Mhm.
one of the more surprising things you found? Like, was there anything that you kind of went through the pictures and you like really had to do a double take and then make sure you were seeing it right?
Yeah, man. You probably have to be scrolling through all of my page to but I mean there's a few that are like that. That one was unusual. I mean a Navitimer on a pilot isn't that unusual. The ribbon thing was odd.
Yeah.
And just tying it into the first female helicopter pilot was pretty cool. Yeah, there's been some where I've just kind of gotten lucky. There was one where uh there was a musician named Mike Oldfield, who's I think like more of a composer kind of, but he did a song called Tubular Bells, which I think was used in Exorcist. This is getting
Mm.
really dorky. I don't even like Exorcist. I just know this because I've researched it. I found a picture somehow of him. I guess he was a pilot. I think he's still alive. I guess he is a pilot, but he's like in a helicopter and he's got an IWC Porsche design Compass or like one of the old,
Oh
and I
yeah,
have
yeah,
one.
yeah.
I'm a big fan of that model. Yeah, and just randomly, and I think I had just gotten mine like maybe a week before,
Nice.
and I saw watch on his wrist, and like I said, you open 20 tabs, and then you go back through, knock out the ones that are either you don't care about or you can't tell. Because I try not to post watches too much if I can't tell what it is.
Uh
I mean,
huh.
I've definitely been wrong, but I like to be pretty sure before I post it. I guess I
Sure.
don't love being corrected. I do because it helps me learn, but I'd like to be right
Yeah. Yeah.
when I post it. I've certainly been wrong before, and people are on the internet are very good at calling you out when you're
There's
wrong.
always
So
going to be somebody that
yeah,
knows more than you too.
oh yeah,
There's always the specialists in whichever model and ever. So yeah, being
hmm
wrong on the internet's just part of being on the internet, I suppose.
oh yeah, and there, and so I have some. I save them all in like a big Excel sheet, a hopper. And my brother, Devin, who kind of got me into watches, my twin brother,
Hmm.
he has an Instagram account called Foglark, but he's a biologist, so he does a lot of bird related stuff. But he's very into watches too, very knowledgeable, and he also looks through these archives and sometimes helps me find leads for stories and stuff. So he has access to this hopper to this shared Excel sheet, and
Hmm.
so we'll just add, what's the year, what's the watch, what's the link to the photo, that kind of stuff. So we have I don't know how many hundred, but we do sometimes save ones where we're like, I don't know, unknown chronograph, unknown dive watch, and there are a few that still sort of like haunt me that I think someday I'll just go, oh, that's what that is. But you know, there are definitely ones where I just some pictures are just too low quality, and sometimes they're
Yeah.
good quality, and I just have no idea, which really irritates me. But nobody can know every vintage watch, and
No,
so
no, I
you
wish
know,
we could. That'd be a nice skill to
yeah,
have. And there's so many
I'm working
brands,
on it.
right? There's so many brands that just like vanished too, or were
Yeah.
owned by
Oh
so
yeah.
many different companies, and yeah, it's so
hmm
difficult to say. I love that you and Devin are both
hmm
into the watches. I've tried with my brother to get him into it, and I just can't seem to
Yeah.
like click that onto him. So how did that start like with you guys? Did he just sort of bombard you eventually with watch stuff, or was there maybe did he give you a watch as a gift or something one day? Or I just want to know what that was like that got
Yeah.
both of you on the path.
No, that's a good question. So like being an identical twin, uh, he's a minute older than me. I mean, I would say like my whole life, it's always been sort of like he gets into this, I get into it, I get into this, he gets into it. Like there's a lot of we're very similar, and obviously we like to do stuff together too.
Mm-hmm.
So, like when he was in college getting his wildlife biology degree, he had to do bird watching for an ornithology class, so he was required to do it. So I just started doing it with him, and so there were like I don't know 4 or 5 years where I was like really into birding, and I don't do that as much anymore. But it kind of followed, or I got into a certain type of like workout routine, and then he got really into it. And so we've done that with a lot of hobbies. With watches, I would say it was Devin first, because growing up I wasn't like, I had watches, but I wasn't like, I'm not one of those people who was an enthusiast when I was 5 with my first Mickey Mouse
Yeah, yeah.
watch. Like I had some. I guess I liked them, but I don't know that I even still have them. But yeah. So I got into it. I don't know, almost. I guess it would have been about 10 years, almost 10 years ago, probably. So 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
Devin was kind of into it first. We've always kind of liked gear and stuff. So it was kind of natural. I remember we were going on a family cruise to Alaska, and Devin had bought this Seiko mod, like a Seiko 5 Yoboki's mod,
Yeah,
and
classic.
he
Yeah.
wore it. And yeah, and I didn't even wear a watch on that trip, and he wore it, and yeah, that kind of was like I looked at it. I'm like, that's pretty cool, and he told me about how it was modified and all this stuff, and um, that was I think when I was getting my undergraduate or my graduate degree, and I think it was my undergraduate degree. I was working on it at the time and online. Well, it was in person, but whatever. So I was working on it, and my parents wanted to get me something when I graduated, and it was like, well, Devin's, a watch seems like a great thing to get. And so I have it somewhere written down, my first list of like what I wanted, and it's all crazy things I wouldn't really want now. But my parents bought me an Explorer 1016 homage called a Xeno Explorer is what they call it.
Uh-huh.
It's a nice looking watch. Obviously I still have that because it's sentimental, and so that was really kind of my first one. And I remember going down the rabbit hole a little bit, and then I bought a Squala. The first kind of expensive one that I bought with my money that wasn't a gift was a Squala.
Yeah.
That I wore to the Caribbean, and I eventually sold. And yeah, you know how the hobby goes. So like I started with that. I was like, this is so expensive. I'll buy this. I'll be good. Blah blah blah. The same story everybody who's into watches
Yep.
says.
Yep. Tale as old as time.
Um,
Right.
yeah, and then I think I got kind of I started using eBay a lot, uh, and I think on some level I was kind of like addicted to like finding deals on eBay, and
Mm-hmm.
I was also learning a lot by just seeing all the models on eBay.
Sure.
I've said this on other podcasts, but a lot of the stuff I've learned about vintage watches or even interesting stories, I've actually learned from people like on eBay. Because occasionally you'll see a watch and it'll be like you can tell if it was just sitting there. I mean, you work in vintage watches, but it's like one of those photos where it's like not a great photo. It's all scratched up.
Yep.
Their name is like Diver 1960s on eBay or what, like, and you go, well, I wonder if this is this person's original watch,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because if so, I'd love to just know, did you get it at a dive shop? How long, blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes I will just reach out to them and just say like, or they'll, if you're lucky, they'll write in the description, this was my grandfather's watch, or this was my
Yeah.
dad's watch, or sometimes this was I bought this when I graduated diving school in 1965, and you know, so then I would learn a lot. I wouldn't always buy them, obviously, but I would learn a lot that way. Sometimes I would buy them. Like Devin has a nice early 70s Doxa Shark Hunter
Oh yeah.
that I sent him a
Mm-hmm.
link to. Yeah, and I sent him a link to it on eBay and just said, because he's a huge Doxa fan, and I said, I think this is probably the original owner because they had listed like some scuba gear and I think a Zodiac Super Sea Wolf and that Doxa.
Yeah.
And so Devin reached out to him and they worked out a deal, and Devin got the whole backstory of like he bought it when he was like 17 when he got dive certified
Wow.
and where he bought it in California, blah, blah, blah. So it's not always obviously like whatever. I was in Sea Lab. A lot of times it's
Right.
just like, I
Yeah.
like to recreationally dive. But it's still really not for me. I think it's really cool to know the history of your specific, even just your
100%.
specific one.
Yeah, it's nice to have
Mhm.
like any kind of provenance, and you're absolutely right
Yep.
that like on eBay there are those sort of random listings that are very clearly not from a dealer, or the watch probably runs but they've just, well, the crystal's scratched, and for us that's like, okay, we'll polish crystal, get a new crystal. But for a lot of people, they
Yeah.
just buy their one or two watches, and that's all that they have and all that they use. And it's great
Hmm.
that I was just having this conversation. A lady came in the store the other day and was talking about antique shopping and stuff like that. And I feel like in a way it's getting much harder to find those sort of special finds out there because everyone's got the internet. Watches are more
Hmm.
popular now than they really have been. So even a cursory search can kind of tell you what your watch is worth. But it's nice to know that there's still those couple people out there that are just selling their watch with their experiences and their stories, and then you get to become the custodian of those stories as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a really kind of nice thing, I think. So that's how you started, really, is digging all through eBay and just looking for interesting stuff. And what do you have what do you have in the, I'm sure you've got a good handful of watches, but what are some of your favorites that you have right now or have come in and out of the collection?
Yeah. I mean, we saw the Seiko. So I don't actually wear this that often. I have this Antarctic Seiko, and then I have a 6105. And a lot of them are kind of that same story, like just kind of a deal. The 6105 I got a couple $100 maybe. That was pretty early when I was into watches,
Yeah.
and it was a website called OfferUp, which was kind of like a Craigslisty
Mm-hmm.
thing. And this person had posted a whole lot of watches just like laid out on like above the stairs on some carpet. And the only one of note was the 6105. And I had known enough at that point to know what it was.
Yeah.
And we worked it out. And I want to say it was a couple $100, and I got it serviced. And she said it had belonged to her boss or something who passed away, and he was in the army for a while, so maybe he had it when he was in the army. She didn't really, so I didn't get the full history, but that was, I think, my first one of my first vintage Seikos. It was long before I had this one.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I still have that. And then yeah, I have a couple watches. I mean, yeah, I have too many watches, but I've pulled a few aside. Let's see. So this one I got, I want to say like last year, but this is let's see. This is a Tudor Prince
Oh,
Oyster Date. You
yeah.
can't really make it out, but it has the Philippine Airlines logo on the bottom,
That's
which
so
is pretty
funny.
cool. Hmm.
One of my customers literally just texted me a picture of his version of that yesterday, like literally
Yeah,
just yesterday.
yeah.
That's such a strange coincidence.
Yeah, and so I mean I like Tudor quite a bit. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
gotten into Tudor more as I've sort of collected and so yeah, I got this. This is another eBay one, but the pictures were terrible. It came from an estate sale. The seller got an estate sale in I want to say Arizona.
Uh-huh.
We worked out a deal. I got it. Um, and yeah, I mean, this one's unique, and it's funny. Watches of Espionage picked up one of these just recently, and I was messaging him, and I said like, all right, I can't, now I'll get ready to sell this now that, now that it's got that
Now that he's
Watches of
posted up.
Espionage bump.
Yeah,
So his doesn't
exactly.
have that same logo. But yeah, this is a cool one. I mean, if you like because they're pretty cheap. Like you can find them.
Yeah.
I want to say this was under 1,000. What's nice about them is they're 38 millimeters too. So if you're like
Mm-hmm.
date just kind of thing, they're a decent size for what they are. And I think with that kind of like bracelet taper, they're pretty. I mean, they're an acquired taste, but
Yeah.
I like that one. I had heard that these were given to Philippine airline pilots after 15 years
Sure.
at their company. It's not engraved or anything on the
Yeah.
back, but I've never seen one that is. So maybe they just didn't do
I
that.
don't
But
know. I was also
um,
told too that at the time that these were produced, there were actually supposedly more American pilots flying for Philippine Airlines than there were actually Filipino pilots. So
yeah,
that's why there's
yeah,
so many of them in the States. I don't know if you've heard the same
yeah.
thing, but that's what I was told.
I've not. It makes sense, especially with like with. I mean, it's anecdotal, but everything I do is. But yeah, with it popping up in Arizona, I mean, it's
Hmm.
possible it was a pilot from the Philippines, but it's also a better chance that it was just a U.S. pilot who
Yeah,
who
yeah.
worked for Philippine Airlines. So that's a fun one. So I have that. This one's another eBay in sort of the vintage realm.
Oh,
Hard
nice.
to see. There we go.
Yeah.
So I have the bezel for it, which was a real pain to source because I bought it without a crown or a bezel. But it's an old Longines Nautilus, so they made this reference for it. It's a super compressor technically, but it's a single crown.
Hmm.
But the legend diver that everybody knows now, obviously is twin crown. so this predates that. This was 1958. So I got this one on eBay. Again, I was out visiting my parents and just hanging out with the family. It was like a holiday weekend, and I was just checking eBay because I just habitually just open the app, which isn't a good it worked out well in this case. But nobody wants to be talking to me, and I'm like, oh, just give me one second to open the app. But this popped up, and I think it was not good pictures. I think it just said like Longines dive watch, like that's all it said, and it had a buy it now price. I want to say it was under $500. And I recognized the model. It was missing the bezel, missing the crown, but it had the bracelet and everything. So, which already, I mean, these bracelets alone are probably a few $100.
Yeah, for sure.
So I recognized it. I started getting all anxious and like, well, I need to Google the model, make sure it looks good, blah, blah, blah. But because it was a buy it now, it's not like I was, saying like, I'll give you $100 for it if it's even worth, like it had a listed price. So I did some like very quick research and kind of trusted my gut a little bit, and I bought it. And I guess the guy got like 20 offers after I bought it that were like, oh, I'll give you, and he was like, no, I'll sell it to you. I don't know that he got like, I'll give you $1,000 or $1,500 or whatever, but he definitely said he had people messaging saying like, if this guy doesn't pay, let me know and I'll buy it, like kind of getting in line. So I got it, and I reached out to Longines and got, you can get, extracts from their archives, which is a nice feature from Longines. But yeah, it was produced in 58. They only made it for 2 years, 58 to 59.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say it's a 40 millimeter case, 40 or 42. It's big, especially for late 50s.
Yeah.
And it's got kind of a Tudor Ranger sort of hands.
Yeah.
It's
cool.
got it's gilt dial, like it's got all that, and I was able somehow to source the new bezel and an original bezel and an original crown. And I got it serviced, and I almost never wear it, but it's super cool. I mean, it's one, so maybe someday I will get rid of it, but I don't know. It's a rare model, and I like having it sort of in my watch box. But yeah, on top of that, I have the Compass Oar, which I didn't pull out, but that's a great one. Porsche Design IWC. I'm a big fan. Especially, like I said, like their original stuff. The one I have is 1978.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But just to put a compass with an automatic movement and all PVD'd, like just to cram all that into one thing, one watch is, to me, I just think I like the innovation, and it's all aluminum, which is fun. I mean, it's super light. The bracelet like breaks apart so you can lay it. But it has all these features that were just like. Yeah. Just around the quartz crisis, they were like, how do we, not rebrand necessarily, but in some way, I mean, how do we stay relevant? How do we make something that's different from what everybody else is doing? And that watch is totally different from what everybody else was doing at the time.
I find that I think a lot with vintage stuff. I wasn't really super in the vintage world before I started working here. Like I knew all the classic vintage models that kind of like all watch enthusiasts know, and I knew a little bit of stuff, but when I started working here, like some of the things that really struck me initially was the creativity and the uniqueness of design and functionality that vintage watches have, I think, over modern, specifically when it comes to like complicated watches with calendars or chronographs or what have you. Like we have so many we have like a Enicar moon phase, 30 millimeter case. There's a moon phase in there and a calendar in 30 millimeters. It's like if you ask for that watch now, they would be like, we need a 43 millimeter case. It's going to cost you $12,000. But back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, like this was just functionality, and I'm sure you paid a premium, but the stuff they could fit into smaller cases, the uniqueness of design, whether it's the Porsche design where the bracelet comes apart so you can store it better or whatever, like there's so many more creative things that were coming out of the later time periods than I think what we have now for most watches.
Well, and that Porsche design compass or compass watch, the bracelet breaks apart because every link is 5 millimeters exactly, and you can lay it on a map and use the 5 millimeters to measure distance based off the scale of the map.
That's brilliant.
So it's not even like I wish it was it's not even something that's like, oh, it's better for storage or it's convenient or it's literally like every single piece of that watch had a purpose.
Yeah.
It's ultralight because it's aluminum. I mean, maybe the PVD didn't really have a purpose. I don't know. It's not shiny, but yeah, the compass obviously has a purpose. Telling time clearly does. But yeah, even the way the bracelet breaks apart was like, oh, you can lay it on a map. I've not posted it on my page, but there was an image of somebody driving in the Paris Dakar back in the 70s, and he's wearing a compass or
Nice.
as well. So, which makes perfect sense for something like that. It's like, I mean, you have a compass, right? And you
Units of
can use it for your
measurement
map.
and
You can,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it really was like it was like you said, it's basically pure innovation at that point.
Yeah, 100%.
And you're right with vintage watches. I think you see that, and a lot of it you just see much less of today. There's old vintage. Most of the time they're like no name brands, but you can get old. You may have seen them, but there's old dive watches that have a thermometer like right in the middle of them, like dive watch. Those are super unique, and you really don't see that. Depth gauge, mechanical depth gauge watches. There's still some, but I mean they're essentially just a novelty, and I think even back then. They probably were pretty much a novelty, but I mean, they came out first back then. So, and dive chronographs, you got a T-graph behind you in the photo.
Yeah,
so,
sure,
those big old, those big old dive chronographs, and it's funny. So I know you told me before we started recording, but you're wearing an aviator sea diver, an exotic Grenchen. So I found one of those when I was doing a bunch of research on Sea Lab. One of those was worn by an aquanaut in Sea Lab too.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah, I guess it's just a Sea Lab, the Sea Lab 2 program.
Sure,
Sea Lab as well. But yeah, and that was one of my articles early on. So I did the Antarctic Seiko thing, which for total clarification, I mean that article for Hodinkee was written by Cole Pennington.
Yeah.
Who most of us probably know. So yeah, he gets full credit for all the writing and everything. I was sort of like a consultant in that case. The way that I met Cole was through that watch, and I had just got the Seiko, this Antarctic Seiko, and I was at a local Red Bar meetup, and I was showing it to people, and some thought it was awesome, some were like, it's not a Rolex, and that's how meetups tend to go.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
In my experience, yeah. And one of the guys, a local guy who's pretty cool, he was like, you should reach out to Cole Pennington at Hodinkee because he's really into Seikos, and he'd probably love that.
Yeah.
And so I literally just reached out to him on Instagram. I was like, hey man, he did love it. And then he wanted to do a story, and I was already doing the research, or I had done a lot of it. And so we collaborated on it. But I mean, he did all the writing, but a lot of the images I shared with him, and a lot of the my correspondence with people in the program. And he put it all together into this really great story. That I think still holds up really well. And it's really the only sort of official article on those watches, because there's multiple models, that were used in Antarctica. There was this 6105, and then just after that, the Turtle. So in this case, the 6306. So the JDM Turtle, and then after that, which was just recently figured out, there was a 7548.
Oh.
Which was the first one was for a program called the Dry Valley Drilling Project, DVDP. So that's what it says on the dial, DVDP, and there's two variants of that. Then there's mine, which says MSSD, which is the McMurdo Sound Sedimented Tectonic Study, which is, I'm glad they didn't write on the dial. So there's that, and then after that, there was a program called Steros, which I honestly can't remember exactly what. It was like something the ice shelf or something.
Yeah.
But I've seen now 3 examples of 7548s with that printed on the dial. Ironically, the first one I ever saw came from that article that Cole wrote for Hodinkee.
Oh, really?
I had gone back to check it. Yeah, I had gone back to check it, and there was a comment from someone just at the top, and it was like, hey, I think I have a Seiko with some text that looks just like that, but it's the 7548. Could you reach out to me, and maybe it's from Antarctica? And I did reach out to this guy. He was in South Africa, and sure enough, he bought it at he bought like a whole box of watches that needed repair at like a watch shop that was closing down in South Africa. And he thought it was for a coffee company or something, because I guess there's one called Steros. I don't know. And so he was like, I just kind of like, because he has all sorts of cool military watches and stuff. So it wasn't really his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really anybody's wheelhouse, to be fair. But yeah, but it turns out he had probably the first example that anybody had been able to actually tie to Antarctica. And so I actually reached out to some of the connections I had from this watch were involved in multiple programs. So like one guy I reached out to, I think he's in Cole's article, but he has a 6105 with that extra text on the dial and a 6306 both, because he was a part of both programs. So they knew of that program, and they were like, yeah. Basically, it traced it down. It's all in the article, but the Japanese leader of the guy in charge of the Japan Antarctic Research Expedition, his name was Dr. Tetsuya Tori. He's passed away, but he was the one driving all this. It's big, from my understanding. I've never been to Japan, but gift giving is a big thing in Japan, from what I gather, based off the people I've talked to. And so he would give these people gifts, and so he would have these Seiko watches specifically made for the kind of the lead people in the program from the U.S., from New Zealand or Australia, and and he continued that for all three programs. So so that's how I got into contact with Cole, and then it led me to, I mean, Cole's a good friend, and it led me to all sorts of things, really. Like I did get to contribute to some articles for Hodinkee. I got to write one for Hodinkee, which was 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a great jumping off point to talk a little bit more about some of your other editorial journalism contributions. I know you had one on maritime professionals from Hodinkee, right? You've also done a little bit of writing for Worn and Wound too, right?
Yeah, I've done some stuff with Worn and Wound. One of my first, I think it was my first, like, I got paid to write. Well, the first thing I got paid to write was because people are pretty willing to accept like free writing in general. Like, I mean, if you're really bad, they might not, but like if you're halfway decent, they're like, sure, we'll take it, because everyone's always looking for content, right?
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly.
So, and honestly, like when I got into it, I was like, I'll write some stuff for my blog. Obviously, I'm not getting paid for that, but I don't know. People would be like, oh, Justin, you're gonna have to wait 5 years before people will ever pay you. Like, you can't just write something and immediately start getting paid. You need to build up a body of work, blah blah blah. So I was like, okay. I mean, it was a hobby, so that's fine.
Sure.
So the first article I actually got paid to write was for Gear Patrol. I'd have to look, 5 years ago maybe, but they were basically like, yeah, your writing is good. We'll give you like a test article, and it was like five vintage Seikos worth buying for under $500 or something like that. It was one of those types of things.
Yeah, classic. Yeah.
So I wrote that. Yeah, so I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And I wrote it, and then I did another article for Gear Patrol that was actually another eBay thing. So I had seen this watch pop up on eBay. I actually gifted it to Cole Pennington later, but it's an old Caravel. It's like 34 millimeters, and it has a Polaris submarine printed on the dial.
Oh, cool.
And it came from the original owner who worked on a Polaris submarine. And so I kind of just wrote that story up, included some pictures, and that was that. And that helped me build up some of my articles. And then I did some stuff for a blog to watch where I just wrote like a ton of sponsored posts, which a blog to watch, everybody there was great. Sponsored posts are just a different beast. It's basically just advertising and marketing. So it wasn't really as much of my passion, though I did get to write some things for like Aquastar when the Deep Star first came out, re-release. Mm-hmm. So there were certain things where I'm like, well, it's always easier to write if you're like into what you're writing. Yep. But if I'm writing about, a modified Rolex Submariner with a skeleton dot, like sometimes I'm so disconnected from what I'm writing about, you just kind of have to regurgitate copies. So that was a different thing, but was good experience for me to write. I don't know, I probably wrote 50 articles for a blog to watch over the span of a couple of years. So I did that, but yeah, I did end up doing some stuff for Hodinkee. So Cole wrote that Antarctic Seiko one. And then Cole and I worked together on one called something like it was called like watches from government archives, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And so what that was he picked out, I want to say 5 or 10 watches he found in government archives, and then I did the same, and we each wrote like a paragraph about each of the photos. And I want to say, that was like one of the top 5 articles of 2021 or 2022. Like it was fairly popular. It must have been. Um, so that was really cool because we kind of split the byline, I think,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that. But so that was fun, and that's what I was doing anyways. So I'm like, well, I have a big, huge hopper, Excel spreadsheet full of cool ones. I just had to pick out my favorite
Right, yeah.
and then write about them. So that one was like a joint article, and then yeah, I did write one for World Ocean Day in 2022, maybe a couple of years ago. Yeah, and that one's kind of funny. So that was the same kind of thing. I was pulling ocean related historical photos and writing a blurb about them, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny. So I wrote the whole thing. I included all the photos. I sent them the draft and all that. But I never came up with a title for that. Like I didn't write a title. I just wrote. I figured I could do it later or whatever. So they ended up dropping that article, like posting it with a title that someone at Hodinkee had written, and it wasn't written by me. So the title of it was something like the watches that maritime professionals wear or currently wear or something. And I'm like, whoever wrote this, so like if Hodinkee's listening, let me know if you wrote that, because I mean that whole article, the point was it's not what they're currently wearing, it's what they historically wore,
Yeah.
Because I was so excited to look at the comments, which that's an amateur move to get excited to read comments on an article especially on a site like Hodinkee.
Yeah.
There's got to be like 50% are just like waiting to get you. So I was like, I can't wait to see what people think. And I think I read like the first 5 comments, and they were like, maritime professionals don't actually wear these watches. Like they were all like beef to pick with like the title,
Yeah. All the
and
Reddit
so I was
kind of
like,
guys, like, well, actually,
yeah. Well, it's like,
yeah.
it's like, can we put a disclaimer that says Justin's the author of the article, but did not write the title? Because it's like 3 comments that said like, what's up with this title? I think there's one that was like, how did you not put Jacques Cousteau and Blancpain or something like that? And I'm like, So you entertain. A lot of them were really nice. It was just kind of funny because it's like you do all this, and then the title is like the big distractor from the
article. It all off.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, I should have just written a title myself, but that was really cool because that was the first, and that's before Hodinkee kind of made a shift into where Hodinkee is now. They said they're shifting back. Ben said they're shifting back, so we'll see. I mean, I know they had Jason Heaton writing for them again pretty recently, so that's
a good sign.
I think that's a good step in the right direction. But yeah, that was kind of like, so I kind of got in right before Cole left Hodinkee, and right before they transitioned to stuff that's just not my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Sort of like Chanel and
more of that regurgitating copy kind of stuff.
Yeah, copy and celebrity and hype and some of the stuff that just wasn't.
I hope the best for Hodinkee going forward. Because I think we all miss the days when Jason, James, and Cole were kind of really spearheading a lot of the stuff that they were producing, and it really was like legitimate content about watches being worn and used and history and in depth into different references. I think that's the Hodinkee that we all miss. So hopefully they're moving the right way, and kickstarting things off with Jason Heaton doing a diving article is exactly the right way to start. Yeah.
I was glad to see that because like you said, it is what it is because it's all business, but a lot of us, I mean, that's definitely where I got a lot of my knowledge and my passion for watches and history and all that was Hodinkee. And so to see them kind of move back that way is who knows, because you know how the watch culture is just different now than it was when we got into it too. And so some of it is kind of like us, like the old guy yelling at the cloud kind of thing. Like, some of us, we just have to kind of go, it's not the same as it was, and just accept it. And you find your corner of the internet, like I think we're both on like the Grey NATO Slack.
TGN Slack,
Yeah. So like that's a great way to sort of find people who have similar interests and things like that. I think Watches of Espionage is kind of keeping some of that. Hopefully I am, certain people are kind of keeping that vibe alive, but obviously it's less mainstream without a site like Hodinkee. But yeah, so that was so that, and then yeah, Worn and Wound. I've worked with a couple times. I did a Citizen article for Worn and Wound that was kind of similar. It was basically focusing on the ProMaster line, and uh, I had a lot. Luckily, Aqualand specifically, but they were really, I mean, there's a lot of dive history and legitimate like credibility to that.
Oh yeah.
It's not just um. So yeah, so it's nice too. I mean, I have all of these photos and things I post. So if a brand does want to, use them, they're not my photos. I mean, they're on a public, like
Yeah,
anybody
yeah, yeah,
can.
yeah.
They're on an archive. It's not like they belong to me, and so it's nice if they sort of acknowledge that there's work that goes into finding and identifying and all this, uh, but it's not like I own them, so these companies can use them for whatever they want.
Yeah,
So
you're the
I
curator
focused a
of
lot,
it.
yeah, I focused a lot on the Aqualand. I'm a fan of Aqualand, so and I know for people who do dive, there's a legitimate value in an Aqualand.
Oh
Like
yeah.
they do a lot, they work well. So I had a lot of same thing. I had a lot of I sort of wrote about the history of Citizen in the Aqualand, and then a couple other Citizen models as well. And yeah, some cool photos of people recovering whatever from the ocean with an Aqualand or
Yeah, yeah,
researching
yeah.
this or that. And yeah, like I said, that's what kind of gets me interested. So, and I think that's the big draw of vintage watches, right? Is if you like that aspect, the history and the romance of like it's kind of the Moonwatch thing. It's just I like to do it for things other than just the
Yeah.
Moonwatch. In fact, I almost never
100%.
post. Yeah, and I'm not opposed to it. I mean, I do think it's the history of the Moonwatch. I've never owned a Speedmaster, or not a Speedmaster, or yeah, Speedmaster, but I've never owned one, but I do, I appreciate it. It's just Omega doesn't need any help advertising the Speedmaster's
Oh yeah.
exploits. You know what
Yep.
I mean? Where Nevada Grenchen, even though when they were relaunched, or Aquastar, I've worked with Aquastar quite a bit.
Hmm.
And and same thing. Aquastar showed up a lot back in the day. A lot of legitimate divers uh, wore Aquastar,
Sure.
and just because not a well known, it's not as well known as Rolex and Tudor and all these big names, but it pops up just as
I
frequently,
mean,
especially
yeah,
in certain
exactly.
situations.
They're there. I mean, you look at the number of Doxas that were worn on the Sea Lab projects, and you're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
Doxa, Tudor, I mean, they're all there. And that's like, from a fanboy perspective, right? That's what you and Ben and Woe and this kind of core group of people really bringing back the history and showing the watch world where these brands were and how much they were used and loved by the people that needed them as tools. And that's kind of back to your point about finding your little corner of the watch community, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what this is all about, right? You just find the people that are into the same kind of watches as you, or who look at watches the same way. The people that look at them like
Mm-hmm.
little bits of history, like little nods to the past and tools that hold all these memories. Like that's what the whole thing's about, man. Is
Oh
just
yeah.
enjoying that and the stories that they had and the stories that they will have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. So when you mentioned Doxa, so another little shout out to my brother. He found a photo when you were asking about photos where I found something where I was like, either that's an unusual place to find it, or Devin found a photo I think on Getty Images, but it's like an engineer at NASA working on a space shuttle wearing a Doxa Sub 300 professional. Um, and it's funny. So there's something great about, like you said, like researching the Antarctic Seiko and going, I literally talked to the owner or I talked to somebody who was there, and you get the full history and you can write a big long form thing about all the history. But I mean, I get just as sort of excited about, there's something fun about not knowing and just being able to use your imagination. Like,
Sure.
who
Yeah.
knows why that guy was wearing a sub 300 working on because we associate it so closely with diving. Who knows? I mean, just because he worked for NASA and worked on space shuttles doesn't mean he didn't dive,
He's
right?
in Florida after all.
Maybe,
Down he's in Cape
yeah.
Canaveral
So,
probably.
so
So yeah.
maybe he
Uh huh.
did,
Yeah.
and you see so many, and I like to post the ones that so a lot of my posts will be just divers. Like I said, Sea Lab 3, almost everyone wore a Doxa, sub 300T. And so, I like posting that because it's like I said, just lends credibility. Like, hey, this is true. People aren't just making up history, because that's
Yeah.
a big thing in the watch industry. Is you hear fabricated history, or
Oh, dude. Yeah.
they
All
show
the
this,
time.
but they say this, but they have no proof that it was actually. So I enjoy just posting something saying like, in case you want a little bit more proof that this was being used, like here's a Doxa next to, this dolphin that was used to deliver goods down to Sea Lab.
Yeah.
It's there. I mean, I'm not good enough at Photoshop, so that's a legitimate photo,
Yeah. Yeah.
and people enjoy it. But there is something fun about going like, look at this guy diving with a digital pulsar Hamilton watch, or look at this person working on a space shuttle in a Doxa Sub 300, like
Mm-hmm.
no T, thin case, right? And it's a bright orange dial. It's clearly what it is
Yeah.
on a pizza price. Um, so yeah, so I enjoy both aspects. Sometimes it is just like, this is a guy who's a diver wearing a Rolex Submariner. It's not that, I'm not reinventing the, people know that they wore Rolex subs to actually dive, but
Yeah.
Cole did an article called "The Man with the Golden Sub,"
Oh yeah.
who's a guy that, and if you haven't read that, it's a great article. That's the guy I had talked to, that I sort of introduced Cole to, and so he wrote that article. Brett Gilliam, and he actually died, I think, last year, which was sad to find out because he was sort of a titan in like the diving industry. But yeah, he was working for National Geographic and had the opportunity to buy. They want him to wear a Rolex, and he had the opportunity to get it for some pretty wild discount. So he got a solid gold sub, and he had worn it. I mean, I probably talked to him, I don't know, 5 years ago, 4 years, a while back, and he had been wearing it since, I don't know, 1970s when he got it. And for dive, I mean, he was still diving and stuff. And so that's really fun. But so sometimes you still will find little outliers like that. Like a Rolex sub is not an unusual dive watch for divers in the 70s. A solid gold Rolex sub
A little different.
probably is.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
yeah.
so, yeah, because who wants to spend that amount and then go diving? But yeah, he treated it just like he would, a steel sub. So,
Yeah.
it is fun to highlight that stuff. And I mean, I'll always have a soft spot for vintage watches. I wear modern stuff a lot now too,
Mm-hmm.
because I've been in collecting long enough to know where vintage watches shine and where modern watches shine.
Yep.
And there is something to be said for, for making your own stories too. I mean, because I like that part so much. But at the end of the day, I know that this watch sort of had a whole life before me, and I like the stories it has with it. But I also am not operating a museum. You know what I mean? So there's that kind of, there's both sides to it, and there is something nice to just go like, this thing's not gonna. There's a lot of misconceptions about vintage watches. Like, I've had very few vintage watches that, I went to set it and like the crown just like fell out. A lot of them are still pretty sturdy, and they may need to be serviced, but they're still pretty reliable. They're solid. Once they're serviced, I can treat them pretty much like a modern watch within reason. I mean, the thing is nobody treats modern watches the way they're capable of being treated.
Yeah.
Like I have this, I mean, everybody seems to have one on this,
Oh,
but
yeah,
I have an
FXD,
FXD, so I just got this pretty recently, and I was lucky to be invited when they released this to Florida, and so it was one I was sort of inevitably going to get. And I do like it too. I mean, I think in terms of innovation, I think just the solid titanium case.
Yeah.
This case is another cool innovation that you really don't see a lot. I mean, you see fixed spring bars, and I get conceptually it's the same sort of thing, but so there's multiple reasons I kind of got that one, but nobody's within reason. Nobody's taking this 200 meters. Nobody's using it the way. So just because a vintage watch can't be taken maybe 200 meters, nobody's doing that anyway. So for daily wear, if you have a good service vintage watch,
fine.
It's going to be fine, right? And I know that, so I think a lot of it for me now is just kind of, it's more based off of like every scratch on it is a scratch I put on it. I know it's cliche, but that's kind of what it is. Is like, I like having the vintage ones, and for certain occasions, but there is something to be said for, for owning something from when it's new. That way, when I'm ancient and somebody else buys it off of me on eBay,
they're the one getting the one.
Yeah, they can deal with it. Yeah, you're getting the story.
Original owner. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've put so many scratches. I got the 2017 reissue of the Doxa Sub 300s, and I've put so many scratches into that. I got the date that I got my open water cert engraved on the back of it. So that's that's the adventure watch, right? We're coming up.
Yeah.
We're right at an hour now, and we're going a little long. We try to keep these around 45-50 minutes. So I mean, I'm sure we could talk about vintage watches for another hour if we're just getting into what we love and what we like and all that stuff. But in the spirit of wrapping things up, man, it's been great finally talking to you. I mean, after following you for a long time and kind of running in a lot of the same circles. Before we close out, could you just what's coming up? I mean, is there anything to look out for from Wristorian? Are you working on any exciting articles, or do you have anything to tease to the people?
Yeah, I'm I have kind of a cool project with this with the FXD that I just showed, some sort of DLC and some modification stuff that I'm working on that kind of ties into a bigger project. So that hopefully there'll be some progress pics sort of that whole process coming up. And then I was in talks with somebody from Hodinkee recently about full sort of interview highlight of a fairly well-known adventurer that I'm hoping. I've been in contact with him, so I'm hoping to kind of interview him and highlight the watches he's used through his career. So that pitch is kind of ongoing, and I as they get back into some of that type of stuff on Hodinkee, if I have a place to contribute things that, I mean, and if not, I can write it for my blog. I can write it for the highest bidder. I mean, however I want to do it, really. So it'd be great to just get stories out there. That at the end of the day, that's the goal. So so I have a few things like that in the works, and then of course I try to every weekend I try to do on Sundays I try to do a post of a new sort of historical find on my Instagram. So that's just _Wristorian for my handle on Instagram. So feel free to message me, or if you have cool photos, send them in to me, or if you want to chat. That's where I do most of my communication. So just every weekend, hopefully you get something to look at. So, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a treat having you on, and we'll drop links for everything that you mentioned, and I'm looking forward to see what that Hodinkee interview is, and also the work on the FXD too. I know there's some cool stuff to be done with that. So I'll let you go. Thanks so much for coming on. Have a great rest of your weekend, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.